In March 1981, in the courthouse of the German city of Lübeck, a sensational and harrowing trial was underway over the brutal murder of 7-year-old Anna Bachmeier. Sitting in the dock was Klaus Grabowski, a man with a dark past, repeatedly convicted in the past for abusing minors. His name had long been known to the police and townspeople, but this time the crime he confessed to shocked even seasoned investigators. Grabowski immediately admitted that he had strangled the girl, but denied committing any sexual acts against her. According to his version, little Anna allegedly tried to blackmail him. She demanded money, threatening to tell her mother that he had touched her inappropriately. Klaus claimed he was so terrified of returning to prison that he panicked and decided to get rid of the child in the most horrific way. This version sounded absurd and cynical, but the defendant had an experienced lawyer, skilled at turning even the gravest crimes into stories of unfortunate accidents or mental disorders. Anna's mother, Marianne Bachmeier, realized that the court would most likely declare the murderer insane and send him to a psychiatric hospital, from which he would be released in just a few years. For a mother who had lost her child, this was unbearable. In her heart there was no longer any room for faith in justice. She decided that she herself would become Klaus's judge and executioner. On March 6, 1981, Marianne, who had smuggled a small Beretta 70 pistol into the courtroom, did something few parents would dare. When the proceedings began and Grabowski once again tried to justify himself, she pulled out the gun and shot her daughter's killer right in front of judges, prosecutors, and journalists. The courtroom froze. A mother, desperate to find truth in the law, carried out justice herself on a repeat offender. What awaited her after this act? How did society perceive a mother who took justice into her own hands? We will learn about that later. But first, it is worth going back to her beginnings, to her life before the tragedy. Marianne was born on June 3, 1950, in a refugee camp in Sarstedt, a small town near Hanover. Her parents had found themselves in dire straits after the end of the Second World War. Her mother, Hannah, came from a wealthy family of Junkers from East Prussia, who before the war had owned large estates and lands. But after Germany's defeat and the advance of the front, she had to abandon everything and flee to save her family. Her father, Joseph, was a staunch Nazi, an SS officer awarded the Knight's Cross and Iron Cross for his participation on the Eastern Front. The war left deep scars on Joseph Bachmeier. Returning home from the front, he remained obsessed with Nazi ideas and could not let go of his past as an SS officer. This heavy legacy affected the upbringing of his daughter Marianne. The atmosphere in the house was tense. Her father demanded discipline and unquestioning obedience, instilling fear rather than confidence. All of this gradually shaped the girl into an insecure personality, living under constant pressure and criticism. It was no surprise that Hannah's marriage to such a man could not last long. First, Joseph began abusing alcohol, and then he started violent outbursts with shouting and aggression. In the end, Hannah could no longer endure it. She left him, determined to save herself and her children from constant turmoil. Hannah's new partner was Paul Weiss, a professional wrestler and truck driver. It seemed life should have improved, but for little Marianne, her stepfather turned out to be even worse than her real father. The girl never accepted him and refused to call him father, instead addressing him coldly as Uncle Paul. This infuriated the man, who took it as an insult and mockery. In response, he showed her no mercy and often beat her for the slightest misbehavior. Thus, Marianne's sense of rejection and loneliness only grew stronger. But the years went by, and the girl grew up. At 15, despite her difficult childhood, she experienced real love for the first time. Her chosen one was Hermann Pagel, the son of well-to-do parents. The young people truly loved each other and even planned to marry. For Marianne, it was a chance to escape the vicious circle of domestic violence and poverty. But those dreams were not to come true. Hermann's family categorically rejected a girl from a troubled background, considering her an unsuitable match for their son. Under pressure from his relatives, Hermann broke off the relationship, leaving Marianne alone. The story unfolded like a tragic novel. By then the girl was already pregnant. At 16, Marianne was left alone, with a child on the way and without any support. Her mother and two younger sisters tried to hide her condition from Paul Weiss, fearing his rage, but he soon learned the truth. Enraged, the stepfather threw his stepdaughter out of the house. The pregnant girl spent the first night in the park, with no roof over her head and no means of survival. The next day, her mother, risking a new scandal, rented a tiny room for Marianne, hiding it from her husband. The two half-sisters, pitying her, secretly brought food and clothes to help her at least survive. But the secret was quickly revealed. Paul Weiss found out that Marianne was still living nearby, and another scandal erupted. Life, however, went on. On March 11, 1967, just 3 months before her 17th birthday, Marianne gave birth to a daughter she named Christina. It seemed that this event should have reconciled and united the family, but things turned out otherwise. For a while, Marianne was allowed to return home, but very soon the situation worsened again. Paul would not tolerate a stepdaughter with a child in his house and insisted that she leave the family. As a result, the young mother was sent to a shelter for single women, where conditions were harsh and resembled a disciplinary institution more than a place of help. Marianne found herself in complete isolation, far from her relatives. Little Christina was taken in and raised by her grandmother Hannah. Marianne never received any real love, warmth, or care from her father or later from her stepfather. Childhood and youth spent in an atmosphere of humiliation, beatings, and constant pressure left deep scars on her soul. She began early to look for the missing tenderness elsewhere, with other men, hoping someone could fill the void. While in the shelter where her stepfather had placed her, Marianne increasingly ran away to meet men. For her, it was not so much recreation as an attempt to feel needed and loved, even if only for a time. Soon the girl fell in love again and became pregnant a second time. When her family went on vacation, Marianne made a desperate decision. She secretly returned home from the shelter, hoping to live for a while in a familiar environment and maybe feel in control of her life. But fate struck her again. One of the neighbors, noticing the girl was home alone, took advantage of the situation. When Marianne was already 8 months pregnant, he broke into the house and raped her. For the girl, it was a dreadful shock. As he left, the neighbor threatened, "If you tell the police a word, I'll bury you alive." But Marianne did not succumb to fear and decided to tell the truth. She went to court. At the trial, the man tried to justify his crime by smearing her reputation, claiming she was a prostitute. Those words wounded Marianne to the core. In that society, such accusations were taken extremely seriously and virtually destroyed a woman's reputation. When stepfather Paul Weiss and the family returned from vacation and learned what had happened, he did not defend his stepdaughter. On the contrary, he used the situation to finally get rid of her. He filed an official request to send Marianne to a corrective institution. For the girl, this was the last straw. The sense of betrayal, violence, and hatred from those closest to her drove her to despair, and she attempted to take her own life. Fortunately, she was found and saved in time, preserving not only her life but also the life of the unborn child. Some time later, after Marianne had given birth, fate once again took an unexpected turn. Her stepfather died. For the family, it was a tragedy, but for Marianne, it was a relief. And then something even stranger happened. Paul Weiss's parents, grief-stricken but seeing in the newborn a chance to continue their family line, began to beg Marianne to give them the baby to raise. The situation seemed paradoxical. Not long ago, her stepfather had wanted to be rid of her, and now his parents were ready to take on the care of her child. It seemed that Marianne finally had a chance to start life anew. Her tormentor was gone, the children were in safe hands, and she herself was still young and full of strength. She only needed to pull herself together, get her head straight, and try to build a normal future. But years of humiliation and the heavy imprint left by the men in her life did not allow her to recover quickly. She began seeking solace in nightlife. More and more often Marianne went to bars, looking for distraction in noisy company and wild parties. Alcohol and casual relationships replaced what she had been denied at home: warmth, attention, and acceptance. At one of these parties at some acquaintance's place, she met Christian Bertel, a young hippie who lived by the ideals of free love and rebellion against societal norms. Their acquaintance quickly turned into a whirlwind romance. Marianne slept with him almost immediately, as if repeating the pattern of her life. After meeting Christian, their life together moved fast. Marianne soon became pregnant. For her, it was both a surprise and a hope. She believed that now, at last, she had a chance to build a real family. Before long, Bachmeier discovered that Christian was not just a carefree hippie, as he had first appeared, but a successful pub owner in Kiel. This news stunned her and gave her confidence. The future could be more stable than before. Overjoyed, she told him about the pregnancy, and the young couple decided to live together. But life together turned out to be far from idyllic. Frequent quarrels and outbursts of jealousy poisoned their household. This was especially hard on Christina, Marianne's elder daughter, who became a witness to the fights. After yet another hysterical outburst from the girl, Marianne, not wanting her daughter to repeat her own fate, made the painful decision to give Christina to a stable foster family, hoping to spare her a life like her own. In 1972, when Marianne turned 22, she and Christian began running the pub Tipas in Lübeck. This was a step toward a new life, but it demanded enormous effort. The bar consumed all of their time and energy. Endless dealings with customers, bookkeeping, supply runs, night shifts. On November 14th of that same year, Marianne gave birth to her third child, a girl she named Anna. At first, Christian and Marianne tried to juggle work and childcare, but constant exhaustion was eating them alive. Marianne often took little Anna with her to the pub. The girl would spend long hours amidst the smoke, noise, and alcohol, falling asleep right in the bar while her mother worked or nodded off behind the counter. Anna practically had no real childhood. Instead of games and bedtime stories, she was surrounded by adult conversations, clinking glasses, and the smell of alcohol. Bachmeier tried to convince herself that her daughter would manage on her own. After all, she herself had been forced to grow up far too early. But deep down, Marianne knew she could not be a good mother to Anna. The thought of giving her up to a foster family crossed her mind again and again, though it caused her terrible pain. Anna grew into an open, cheerful girl, but also stubborn and independent. She had a strong character, often argued with her mother, and could stand her ground even when it led to quarrels. Conflicts between them flared up often. Marianne saw too much of herself in her daughter, just as headstrong and outspoken. And that's exactly how it happened on the morning of May 5, 1980. That day the family got up late. The morning began with petty quarrels and mutual reproaches. Christian went off to the bar to take care of business, while Marianne had an appointment in the city. The morning of May 5, 1980, was a fateful one for the Bachmeier family. Marianne, rushing to a meeting, was irritated and tired. The 30-year-old woman snapped at 7-year-old Anna, scolding her for oversleeping again and not showing the proper responsibility. In a fit of anger, the mother left her daughter at home and decided to take her to her friend, a doctor named Yogi, that evening. This man had long offered to adopt Anna and was ready to give her the care and upbringing that Marianne herself felt she could not provide. It was a difficult decision for the woman, but she believed it would be better for the child. Anna, however, was upset with her mother and did not want to go to school or obey strict instructions. A protest arose in her mind. The girl decided to skip class and spend the day with her friend. When Anna went outside, she was noticed by a local butcher passing by, 35-year-old Klaus Grabowski. His house was only 200 meters from the bar run by the girl's parents. The man spoke to the child in a relaxed, friendly manner and, to gain her trust, showed her his cat. Anna, who loved animals, was delighted and willingly agreed to go home with him, not even suspecting what a deadly trap she had fallen into. But who was this Grabowski? His past was dark and frightening. In 1973, Klaus had already been tried for attempting to strangle a 6-year-old girl. At that time, he received only a suspended sentence. It would seem that such a person should have been isolated forever, but the system again showed leniency. 2 years later, he committed another attack on 2 9-year-old children, and then he was finally sent to a psychiatric clinic, where doctors diagnosed him with pronounced pedophilic tendencies. In 1976, Klaus was offered a deal. He could leave the clinic if he agreed to so-called retribution, surgical sterilization, i.e., the deprivation of reproductive functions. In desperation, he agreed. However, that was not the end of the matter. 2 years later, with the court's permission, Grabowski began a course of hormone therapy designed to reverse the effects of castration. This therapy partially restored his sexual desire, and the dangerous man found himself back among ordinary people, virtually unsupervised. And then, on that fateful day, 7-year-old Anna found herself in his house. As soon as the door closed behind them, the man stopped playing the role of a friendly neighbor. He attacked the girl and raped her. The child spent several hours in terrible agony and fear. In tears, Anna begged him to let her go, promised never to come back, and threatened to tell her mother everything. For Grabowski, this was a death sentence. He knew that after such words, he would no longer be able to escape punishment. To silence the child forever, he made a monstrous decision: to take her life. Klaus Grabowski acted cold-bloodedly and ruthlessly. To silence the child forever, he took the tights of his partner, a woman who was not at home at the time, and tightly wrapped them around the delicate neck of 7-year-old Anna. The girl resisted desperately, but the forces were unequal. When the child stopped breathing, Grabowski tied up the small body and, trying to hide the traces of the crime, carefully placed it in a cardboard box. Later, he threw the box into a ditch on the bank of a canal, and then, according to other sources, moved it to a pit and covered it with earth. It seemed that the mystery would remain unsolved, but the killer made a fatal mistake. He confided in his partner and told her everything he had done. The woman, shocked by his confession, did not remain silent and immediately reported it to the police. That same evening, Klaus was arrested in a tavern in Old Zolln, where he was trying to act as if nothing had happened. At that time, Marianne Bachmeier returned home and did not find her daughter there. Learning that Anna had not shown up at school, she rushed to search for her, calling friends and acquaintances, running around the neighborhood, but all in vain. By evening, she had no strength left and went to the police to report her child missing. The next morning brought terrible news. Anna's parents were told that she was dead. For Marianne, it was a blow from which she never recovered. Many people awaited the trial, but no video recordings were made in the courtroom. No official footage has been preserved. Later, several films and documentaries were made in Germany in an attempt to recreate the events that shook the entire country. But at that moment, for Marianne, it was all like a nightmare. The night after she learned of her daughter's death, Marianne and her partner Christian invited their closest friends to a pub. There, they decided to record music for the funeral, which was to take place the next day. At the same time, Marianne went down to the basement under the bar, where she took out a gun. Turning up the music to drown out the gunshots, she practiced shooting, as if preparing herself for a decisive step. By that point, her life had been a series of tragedies. Her father was a staunch Nazi, her stepfather a despot and a tyrant. She had one failed relationship after another. Pregnancy, children born without a father, and a constant feeling of guilt. Depression, drugs, attempted suicide. Every shot in the basement reminded her of all these misfortunes. And Anna was always there, the only person for whom she continued to fight. But now she was gone too. Another man had destroyed her life, taking away the most precious thing she had, her child. When Marianne Bachmeier came to the cemetery in Lübeck to choose a final resting place for Anna, the undertaker asked her whether she wanted a single or double grave. Without hesitation, Marianne replied, "A double. It's for Anna and me. I'll be with her soon." The trial did not begin until March 1981, almost a year after the tragedy. The wait was unbearable for the Bachmeier family. Every day seemed like an eternity, and their emotional wounds did not heal. Many people in the city knew Klaus Grabowski as a smiling, polite, and seemingly gentle man. But in court, he showed himself from a completely different side. His behavior was arrogant and provocative. He was rude to the judges, argued with the prosecutor, and constantly acted as if it was not he who was sitting in the dock for the murder of a child, but rather everyone else had to justify themselves to him. Grabowski admitted to the murder itself. He did not deny that he had strangled 7-year-old Anna. But at the same time, he vehemently denied any sexual acts. According to his version, it all looked almost accidental. Anna did indeed come to his house to play with the cat, then allegedly began to demand money from him. When he refused, the girl, he claimed, began to threaten to tell her mother about the harassment. Then, frightened and in a state of emotional distress, he grabbed his partner's tights and strangled the child. This version seemed like a pathetic attempt at justification, but Klaus remained confident, even arrogant, as if he believed he could convince the court. It is unknown whether his lawyer suggested this line of defense or whether he came up with it himself, but the defense was based on the defendant's mental state. Emphasis was placed on the fact that Klaus had undergone chemical castration and subsequently hormone therapy, which allegedly caused him severe mental breakdowns and loss of self-control. The defense argued that the defendant was not guilty in the full sense of the word, that he could not be tried as a normal criminal, and that he needed treatment. Consequently, the issue was not life imprisonment, but transfer to a psychiatric clinic, with the prospect of release after several years. All the hearings were a real torture for Marianne Bachmeier. She came to the courtroom, clenching her hands, trying to keep herself under control, but each time Grabowski's words tore her soul apart. The man, looking her straight in the eye, allowed himself to call her daughter humiliating names and hurled insults at her, as if deliberately trying to destroy the mother of the dead girl. It did not look like a defense, but rather a new form of mockery. What was also shocking to Bachmeier was that the judge, at one of the hearings, agreed to some extent with the defense's arguments. He suggested that the 7-year-old girl could have provoked the adult man to commit the crime with her behavior. It seems that it was Klaus Grabowski's dirty lies and mocking words that were the last straw for Marianne, after which her soul could no longer bear it. On March 6, 1981, on the third day of the trial in Lübeck, the woman decided on a desperate act. She secretly brought a small Beretta pistol into the courtroom, hiding it in her purse. As soon as the hearing began, when the defendant opened his mouth again to justify himself and hurl new insults, Marianne stood up, took out the gun, and, tense with tension, emptied the magazine directly into her daughter's killer. 6 of the 7 bullets hit their target. Grabowski collapsed to the floor, and a dead silence fell over the courtroom. People could not believe that the victim's mother could so cold-bloodedly and decisively end the life of a repeat offender right in front of the judges and prosecutors. But for Marianne, it was not madness or a fit of rage, but a conscious decision, to silence him forever so that he would never again speak vile things about her Anna. Lowering her gun, Bachmeier did not try to run away. She calmly surrendered to the police and offered no resistance. Later, during questioning, she confessed, "I wanted to silence Klaus by any means necessary and stop him from saying nasty things about my daughter. Everything he said killed my Anna. I hoped that he would be dead too." She repeated these words over and over, as if they were a mantra. In her official statement, Marianne wrote, "I did it for you, Anna," and drew 7 small hearts next to it, 1 for each shot. She also admitted that she had dreamed of shooting the killer directly in the face so she could look him in the eyes as he died, but ended up shooting him in the back. For her, it was a symbolic act of revenge, the last step she could take for her daughter. Marianne Bachmeier's trial became a real sensation and attracted hundreds of journalists from all over Europe. She faced life imprisonment, and society was divided into 2 camps. Some saw her as a heroic mother who took justice into her own hands and avenged her child when the law proved powerless. Others considered her no better than Grabowski himself, calling her a murderer, a criminal, and even a daughter of a Nazi who supposedly had evil in her blood. Critics pounced on her with accusations. They called her a woman with a questionable past, devoid of maternal instinct, recalling her life in bars, her affairs with men, and her difficult childhood. But at the same time, many ordinary people sympathized with her. They understood her pain and saw her actions not as cruelty, but as a desperate cry from the soul. In the end, the court took into account the woman's psychological state, her tragic fate, and the loss she had suffered. Klaus's murder was recognized as unintentional, not a cold-blooded, premeditated killing. The sentence was relatively lenient, only 6 years in prison. After the high-profile trial, many famous people, politicians, public figures, writers, journalists, took Marianne's side. Pickets and rallies were organized in her defense outside courthouses and in major German cities. The posters bore slogans such as, "She is a mother, not a criminal," and "Justice was deaf, she made it here." The woman became a symbol of the desperate struggle for justice when the law and the system failed to protect an innocent child. Thanks to widespread public support and positive character references, Marianne Bachmeier was released early after 3 years in prison, although she was sentenced to 6 years behind bars. It is worth noting that in all the time since the trial, Marianne has never publicly repented for her actions. She made no secret of the fact that she did it consciously and solely for the sake of her daughter. Her personal life changed after her release. Christian, with whom she had gone through the tragedy and the trial, left her life for good, but that did not prevent her from trying to find happiness again. In 1985, Marianne married a teacher and moved with him to Lagos, Nigeria. They settled in a German camp, where her husband taught at a local German school. For Bachmeier, it was a new experience. Life in a different culture, new people, the opportunity to start all over again. However, her family happiness was short-lived. In 1990, the couple divorced, and Marianne moved to Sicily. There she lived for several years in peace and seclusion, far from the loud scandals. But in early June 1996, her life was turned upside down again. The woman received a terrible diagnosis: pancreatic cancer. She immediately returned to Germany, realizing that her days were numbered and her strength was waning. She spent her last months in a hospital in Lübeck, where she died on September 17, 1996, at the age of only 46. Before her death, she uttered the words that became her spiritual testament: "I am going where Anna is now. I love her so much." These words fully reflected her inner state. She was never able to come to terms with the loss of her daughter, and her entire life after 1980 was spent waiting to be reunited with her. Marianne was buried next to little Anna in the Bergtar Cemetery in Lübeck. Their grave has become a place of pilgrimage. People come here to lay flowers and reflect on the price of justice and despair. To this day, Marianne's actions remain the subject of fierce debate. Some condemn her, believing that she gave in to weakness and broke the law, thereby putting herself on the same level as the murderer. Others admire her courage and believe that at that moment she embodied the image of a mother who was ready to do anything for her child.